Chapter 11 Things by the Millions. On July 4th, 1876, the United States celebrated its 100th birthday with a Centennial Exposition held at Philadelphia. There were no rifle ranges, roller coasters, or freak shows on the fairgrounds. There was no need for any. American products of all shapes and sizes, from shiny new bicycles to a new machine that sent your voice over a wire, were themselves quite enough to entertain and amaze. Visitors from Europe were astonished at how fast the United States had moved ahead. 100 years before, the country had been composed of 13 weak and separate colonies, of a few towns and many scattered farms. Even 25 years before, when the Great Exhibition had been held in London, England was plainly the leading manufacturing nation in the world. But now, the United States was threatening to take England's place. At this Philadelphia Fair, Machinery Hall drew the biggest crowds, and the Corliss steam engine, the largest engine ever built at that point, dominated the hall. The Corliss was 40 feet high, weighing 700 tons, and produced over 2,000 horsepower. George H. Corliss, the man who had made the great engine, showed how to combine the go-getter spirit with American know-how. When timid businessmen would not buy his improved steam engine, he offered it to them free. In return for the money, his engine would save them by using less coal. From one engine alone, he received nearly $20,000 in 5 years. That was several times what the engine had cost him to make. But it was not only size and quality that impressed visitors from the Old World. They were astonished that the Americans could charge such low prices on so many different things and still make a profit. Early in the 1800s, one ingenious Connecticut manufacturer, Eli Terry, had managed to turn out new clocks that sold for so little it was not worth having an old one repaired. Even before the Civil War, American clocks sold for less than 50 cents apiece, and New England factories were producing 500,000 clocks each year. Now, in 1876, Europeans who saw the Philadelphia exhibits were convinced that Americans would change the world. The American machines, one Swiss engineer predicted, would overwhelm all mankind with a quantity of products, which we hope will bring them blessing. To make things by the millions, Americans first had to create whole new industries and whole new ways of thinking. Newest and most essential was the industry for making machine tools. Machine tools were the parent machines, the machines that made the sewing machines, the gun-making machines, the clock-making machines, and all the rest. Since all of these machines themselves were made of metal, machine tools were mostly metal-cutting tools. In early 1800s, a number of clever British machinists perfected the art of metal cutting. They invented a new measuring tool called a micrometer, from the Greek meter for measure and micro for small, which could measure thousandths of an inch. The Englishmen had a head start, but England was an old country, and many craftsmen were skilled at making things the old way. In America, there were fewer skilled craftsmen and few craft traditions. Workers in the United States were more willing to try new ways. Soon after the Civil War, ingenious Americans were making and improving their own machine tools. One of the most remarkable of the American machine tool makers was William Sellers of Philadelphia. By the time of the Centennial Exposition, America's birthday, his work was already famous. He had invented machines that could measure and cut metal at the same time. These were essential for making standardized screws. And now, screws were more important than anyone could imagine before. Metal screws held the millions of metal parts of the new machines together. In the old days, nobody could make one screw exactly like another. They had to make each screw individually to go into each particular hole in each particular machine. And if you took a machine apart, you had to label each screw so you could put it back together in the same place. As manufacturers made more and more things held together by screws, someone had to find a way to replace the old methods. What good was it to make guns or clocks with standard-sized parts unless you could hold them together with standard-sized screws? In this system of screw threads and nuts, William Sellers offered his own standard designs for the tiny grooves. After that, If you said your machine used Seller's number 6 screw, then everybody knew exactly what you meant. The United States government officially adopted Seller's system in 1868. Before the end of the century, an international congress in Switzerland made it the standard for Europe too. Sellers was also interested in the appearance of the large new machines. Manufacturers had decorated earlier machines like fancy furniture. They painted the machines red, green, purple, and prettied them up with iron beads and carvings. To Sellers, these made no sense. A machine, Sellers said, ought to look like a machine. He began painting his machines machine gray, not for decoration, but to prevent rusting and to make cleaning easier. He took off the gimcracks and set out the modern machine style that lasted into the 20th century. While Sellers was pioneering in new shapes and colors, other Americans were inventing a whole new way of thinking about factories. In the old days, the individual craftsman would simply do things the way everyone had always done them. This was what they called the rule of thumb. You did the job in a rough, practical way, using your thumb instead of precise measure. But the new American factory could not run that way. If the old gunsmith was crude or inefficient, it meant simply that he made less money or that people stopped buying guns from him. But in a factory where thousands of men worked elbow to elbow, everybody suffered if one man blundered. If your work was not precise, your mistakes would appear all over the country in the thousands of misshapen parts that came off of your machine. Now there was need for a new science, a science of avoiding waste. Efficiency was another name for it. The go-getting engineer who invented it called it the science of management. The efficiency pioneer, Frederick W. Taylor, was born in Philadelphia in 1856. His mother, a passionate abolitionist, was determined to liberate men from slavery. Taylor hoped to liberate men from waste. He was astonished that people who worried about conserving forests, water, power, soil, and minerals paid so little attention to conserving human effort. He believed that there was one best way to do anything, but the one way that was most economical and least wasteful was not necessarily the way people had always done the job. Early in life, Taylor experimented to find the most efficient way to talk. He counted his steps and measured his stride. Then he figured out the best way to walk at different times and to different places. He did not drink alcoholic beverages, tea, or coffee, and he did not smoke. He said these wasted human energy. Taylor loved sports and thought they were important in education, but not so much because they were fun as because they helped to give a man endurance for his productive work. He designed his own tennis racket with a curved handle that made it look like a spoon. People laughed at him until 1881 when Taylor had his partner, with Taylor using his spoon-handled racket, won the United States double championship. The Bethlehem Iron Company hired Taylor to help make their enormous plant more efficient. Every year, men shoveled millions of tons of coal and iron ore into furnaces. Paying them to shovel was one of the largest expenses of making iron. Each man brought his own shovel and shoveled any way he wanted. But isn't it possible, Taylor asked, that there might actually be only one best way to shovel? Taylor and his crew went into the factory and wrote down exactly what the men were already doing. Each worker was using his one favorite shovel, no matter what kind of coal he was shoveling. A shovel full of extremely light rice coal weighed only 3.5 pounds, but a shovel full of the heavy iron weighed 38 pounds. Now, Taylor said, is 3.5 pounds the proper shovel load, or is 38 pounds the proper shovel load? They cannot both be right. Under scientific management, the answer to the question is not a matter of anyone's opinion. It's a question for accurate, careful, scientific investigation. Taylor counted the number of shovelfuls of the heavy ore that one man handled in a day. He found that with 38 pounds of ore in each shovel load, a man in one day handled about 25 tons of coal. Then, Taylor cut off part of the metal scoop on the man's shovel so it held only 34 pounds. He discovered that the same man now managed to shovel more ore in the same length of time. Now the worker handled 30 tons, yet the worker was less tired. Day after day, Taylor kept cutting off a little bit of the shovel. He found that when the shovel carried 22 pounds in each load, the man moved the most ore in one day. Taylor had discovered a science of shoveling. He designed several different shapes and sizes of shovels and then tested each one to see that it was the best suited to the stuff it had to carry. His small flat shovel was for the heavy ore, and his immense scoop was for light rice coal. Soon there were 15 kinds of shovels in the Bethlehem tool room. Instead of 600 men to do the shoveling, with Taylor's science of shoveling, only 140 were able to do the same amount of work. Taylor had abolished the waste. This system, according to Taylor, made it possible to pay each shoveler 60% more wages. The wages of workers actually were increased, but naturally enough, many workers were afraid that they would lose their jobs. Others were afraid that even if they kept their jobs, they would have to work harder. Many were afraid that they would be regimented, forced to do their work exactly as everyone else did. They liked their own shovels. They did not like everybody telling them how to do their simple job. Still, all over the country, scientific management became more and more popular with employers. They discovered that by making a science of the simplest jobs, they usually could find a better way of doing it. In an astonishingly short time, the American factory took on a new look. Scientific management engineers invented a completely new way of organizing a factory. Instead of having the worker walk around to pick up parts and bring them to his workbench, the management engineers designed a workbench that moved. Then each worker could stay in one place and keep his mind on his proper job. The bench, now a moving belt, would carry the heavy parts from one worker to another. They called this new kind of moving workbench an assembly line, because the whole machine was put together or assembled on it. In early April 1913, a bold mechanic named Henry Ford decided to try an assembly line for making automobiles. He wanted to make automobiles so cheaply that he could sell them by the millions. He made some improvements of his own in the assembly line. For example, he arranged the moving belt so that it would always be man-high. He changed the height according to the job so that nobody had to waste energy bending down or reaching up. Ford also varied the speed of the belt. He explained, "The idea that a man must not be buried in his work. He must have every second necessary, but not a single unnecessary second. The man who puts in a bolt does not put on the nut. The man who puts on the nut does not tighten it. In operation number 34, the building motor gets its gasoline. On operation number 44, the radiator is filled with water. And on operation number 45, the car drives out." In the early years when Henry Ford had been trying to perfect a gasoline-driven motor, many people laughed at him. They put him in the same class with crackpots who tried to make perpetual motion machines. It was hard to imagine a self-propelled machine that would not run on steam but on liquid fuel. Luckily, in 1897, Henry Ford met the already famous Thomas A. Edison. Some of Edison's own friends had been working on an electric automobile that worked on storage batteries. The problem was that they had to recharge the batteries too frequently. When Ford explained his gas car, Edison cheered him on. "Young man, that is the thing. You have it. The self-contained unit carrying its own fuel with it. Keep at it." Edison said the fuel could be a hydrocarbon, a chemical name for fluids like gasoline. Although Ford then did not even know the meaning of hydrocarbon, he was encouraged and later said that the talk with Edison was a turning point in his life. Ford and Edison became best friends. Even before they had met, Edison, who was 16 years older than Ford, had been an inspiration to Ford, as he was to many other inventors. Edison had invented a new kind of factory, an invention factory. Its purpose was to invent new kinds of things to make. Edison set up his first invention factory in 1870, and with the $40,000 he received from his earlier inventions. He brought the most ingenious man he could find to his invention factory. He inspired them with loyalty and hope, and built them into a team, just like earlier go-getters like Benjamin Silliman and others who had found ways to make rock oil into fuel to light American homes. These men tried to find new uses for old materials and to invent new machines for all sorts of purposes. Thomas Edison and his associates were tireless testers and imaginative mechanics. One of their first feats was to help make electric lighting possible. The most difficult problem had been to find a thread that would give light when electricity was sent through it, and yet would not quickly burn out. A light bulb. They tried all sorts of material: carbon, bamboo, hair, platinum, copper, and scores of other substances. They finally discovered that a filament of charred paper served well if it was in a vacuum. This made possible the commercial production of light bulbs, which soon replaced Rockefeller's oil lamps. As Edison and his fellow inventors, looking for a way to record human voice, invented the phonograph, worked on a way to use the new art of photography to show moving pictures. Edison patented a kinetoscope, a machine that showed moving pictures inside of a box. Edison's own ingenuity seemed endless, but he was also a great organizer, and when he could not make an invention of his own to solve a problem, he bought up the patent rights of others, bought their ideas. Then he found ways to manufacture the new products cheaply and efficiently. He was most interested in how he could make improvements in daily life that would reach everybody. Edison fired the imagination not only of Henry Ford, but of the whole American people. He was nicknamed the Wizard. When Congress awarded him a special gold medal in 1928, they said his inventions had been worth more than $15 billion to humanity. But that was only to say that there was really no way of measuring his enormous contribution to American life. By the time he died in 1931, at the ripe age of 85, he had become an American hero, a truly democratic hero, because his work benefited every living American.